June 7, 1945. A damp prison cell in Altshausen, Germany. On the cold concrete floor lies a 50-year-old man. He's barely conscious. His breathing is shallow and wet. The medical assessment is brutal: a fractured skull, broken ribs, massive internal hemorrhaging. Why did the guards treat him this way? A quick execution would have been mercy, but the men holding the keys wanted him to suffer. For 3 consecutive nights, Polish guards unlocked the heavy iron door. They did not speak. They simply dragged him into the corridor. Then the violence began. They used wooden clubs. They used fists. They stomped on him with heavy military boots. They beat him until he stopped moving, then threw him back onto the stone floor like a sack of garbage. Tonight will be the finale. When the sun rises, the guards will open the cell and find a corpse. His name is Oskar Dirlewanger, and the brutality of his death pales in comparison to the life he led. At first glance, a high-ranking SS officer, but in reality, a beast feared even by his own allies. Dirlewanger was not just a war criminal. He was a deviation so extreme that Berlin received complaints from hardened Wehrmacht generals. They wanted him removed. The archives contain terrifying details. He did not just order deaths, he participated. Witnesses described the scene: Dirlewanger holding a syringe of strychnine. He injected women personally. Then he stood back and watched them die in agony. The list of crimes is endless. He raped children, he tortured the defenseless, he commanded a brigade of the damned, convicts, poachers, and psychopaths released from asylums. Under his orders, this unit murdered over 120,000 civilians in Belarus and Poland. There was no mistake. He burned entire villages with the inhabitants locked inside. The smell of charred wood and flesh followed his unit everywhere. When the Polish guards in Altshausen recognized his face, they made a decision. A trial was too slow. A hanging was too clean. They chose raw physical vengeance. The trajectory is absolute. From a decorated World War I hero to a child killer. From an SS commander to a broken body beaten beyond recognition. It is a descent into darkness without parallel in military history. Other Nazis called him a monster. Justice finally caught him in the dark. But every monster has a beginning. September 26, 1895. 1895, Würzburg, Germany. A child named Oskar Paul Dirlewanger entered the world. His background was standard middle class. His father worked in the insurance industry, a role that guaranteed stability and a predictable future. Young Oskar grew up in an imperial Germany at its absolute zenith. Uniforms filled the streets. Nationalism was the air everyone breathed. Military service was not just a job, it was the highest honor a man could achieve. As a teenager, Dirlewanger showed a sharp intellect and immense ambition. He excelled in his studies. He dreamed of command. When the Great War erupted in 1914, he did not hesitate. 19-year-old Oskar signed the papers immediately. He volunteered for the Imperial German Army. Why did he run to the front so eagerly? It seemed like patriotism, but later events suggested a darker hunger. Dirlewanger served on the Western Front. He participated in the invasion of Belgium. He survived the mud and the rats of trench warfare. He rose through the ranks quickly, becoming a lieutenant. He was aggressive. He led charges where others froze. The military records confirm his status: Iron Cross Second Class in 1914, Iron Cross First Class later in the war. These medals were not given for attendance. They required blood. Dirlewanger proved himself under heavy fire, but the trenches left a mark. 4 years of industrial slaughter changed him: the constant shelling, the sight of friends torn apart by artillery. We do not know the exact moment his mind snapped. At first glance, a decorated hero returning home, but in reality, a broken machine wired for killing. The Oskar Dirlewanger who returned in 1918 was not the idealistic boy who left. Germany surrendered, the nation collapsed into total chaos. The Kaiser fled into exile. The Weimar Republic was declared on paper, but the streets burned. Communist uprisings erupted in major cities. For veterans like Dirlewanger, this was not peace. It was betrayal. They had sacrificed everything. Now they believed politicians and Jews had stabbed the army in the back. Between 1919 and 1921, Dirlewanger refused to stop fighting. He joined the Freikorps. These were paramilitary groups of angry veterans. The footage shows men in mismatched uniforms patrolling the ruins. He participated in crushing the Red Army during the Ruhr Uprising. He fought in Saxony. He fought in Upper Silesia. The Freikorps were notorious for their methods. They did not take prisoners. They dragged suspected communists into basements. Gunshots echoed in the alleyways. Dirlewanger did not just participate. He thrived in this environment. Violence became his native tongue, but this was only the beginning. In 1922, a strange shift occurred. The killer put down his rifle. Dirlewanger returned to university. He studied diligently. He earned a doctorate in political science. Dr. Oskar Dirlewanger, an educated man, an intellectual, a war hero with academic credentials. In 1923, he found a new cause. He joined the Nazi Party. He was one of the early members, drawn to Hitler's promise to restore German greatness. For a few years, it seemed like Dirlewanger might become a respectable citizen. He wore a suit, he held a degree, but the facade could not last. In 1934, everything fell apart. 39 years old. That was the age when Oskar Dirlewanger's life completely collapsed. Police arrested him. The list of charges was not short. Statutory rape of a 13-year-old girl. The victim was a member of his own Hitler Youth Troop. But the investigation revealed more. Embezzlement of funds, drunk driving, grand theft auto after crashing a stolen vehicle. The Nazi Party acted swiftly. They expelled him immediately. The court handed down the sentence, 2 years in prison. Was this just a momentary lapse in judgment, a mistake by a war hero? The prison records suggest otherwise. While Dirlewanger sat in his cell, German police compiled a comprehensive psychological profile. The file described a dangerous man, mentally unstable, a violent fanatic, an alcoholic who erupted into uncontrollable rage under the influence of drugs. This was not an accident. This was his character. At first glance, a scholar with a doctorate and an Iron Cross. But in reality, a child molester and a violent drunk. 1936, Dirlewanger walked out of prison. He was free, but his reputation was destroyed. He needed a war to fix it. He volunteered for the Spanish Civil War. He joined the Condor Legion to fight alongside Franco's fascists. From 1937 to 1939, he served on the front lines. The footage from this era shows the destruction of Spanish towns. Dirlewanger felt at home in the chaos. His brutality in Spain did not go unnoticed. Senior Nazi officials saw potential. Here was a man who had no limits. June 1940. World War II raged across the continent. SS Obergruppenführer Gottlob Berger faced a crisis. The SS needed more manpower. However, the elite units did not want to lower their recruitment standards. Berger came up with a radical plan. He proposed special penal units, battalions filled with convicted criminals. These men would serve in the most dangerous sectors to earn their freedom. But such a unit needed a ruthless commander, a leader who would not hesitate to do the dirty work. Berger checked his files. He remembered Oskar Dirlewanger, a convicted rapist with military experience and a PhD. It was a perfect match. Events moved quickly. On June 24, 1940, Dirlewanger entered the Waffen-SS. He took command of the new unit immediately. His first soldiers were not ordinary conscripts. They were a company of convicted poachers, men who knew how to track through the forests, men who knew how to hunt and kill. The unit received its official designation. The SS Sonderkommando began its operations. Sonderkommando Dirlewanger. That was the official designation on the files. Initially, the mission seemed standard: anti-partisan operations in occupied Poland. The unit hunted resistance fighters in the dense forests. They swept through the villages. But Oskar Dirlewanger had a different vision. He transformed a military unit into a slaughterhouse. Who were his soldiers? You might expect disciplined conscripts. You would be wrong. Dirlewanger recruited the dregs of society. He went to the prisons. He visited the concentration camps. He pulled men from the darkest cells: poachers, violent criminals, convicted murderers, rapists. He offered them a simple transaction, a uniform and a gun in exchange for their freedom. By 1942, the roster expanded. The brigade included not just Germans. Russians, Ukrainians, Azerbaijanis joined the ranks. Nationality did not matter. The requirement was specific: total willingness to kill without hesitation. At first glance, a special task force. But in reality, a roving band of psychopaths. Their reputation spread like a virus. They did not just fight partisans, they hunted civilians. In 1940, the unit was assigned as guards at the Lublin ghetto. The archives preserved the evidence. Reports flooded the headquarters. They described unspeakable acts: rapes in the streets, arbitrary murders, extortion of starving families, brutal beatings for sport. Friedrich Wilhelm Krüger received these reports. He was the local SS and police leader. Krüger was not a humanitarian. He managed concentration camps. He organized mass executions. He was a cold-blooded killer. But even Krüger was appalled. The violence was too chaotic even for the SS. Krüger filed multiple complaints. He demanded the immediate removal of the unit. He wanted them gone. But Berlin had other plans. Instead of a court-martial, the High Command issued a transfer order. 1942. The destination was Belarus. There was no punishment. There was no reform. The killing did not stop. It simply escalated to genocidal levels. 120,000 lives. That is the high estimate of the slaughter in Belarus. The country had become a graveyard under German occupation. Soviet partisans moved through the dense forests, striking convoys and vanishing. The German response was not a search operation. It was absolute destruction. They did not just hunt individuals, they erased entire communities from the map. Dirlewanger's unit was the primary instrument of this terror. Between 1942 and 1944, the death toll climbed daily. Dirlewanger filed reports claiming the elimination of tens of thousands of bandits. But historian Timothy Snyder provides the reality. At least 30,000 civilians were murdered. Other records suggest the number is 4 times higher. 200 villages were burned to ash. Not a single structure remained standing. Why did the violence take such a specific form? It was not just efficiency, it was entertainment. Dirlewanger did not just kill, he improvised. Witnesses described scenes that defied military logic. He injected young women with strychnine. This is a potent neurotoxin. It causes violent muscle spasms. He sat and watched them convulse in agony until their hearts stopped. He kept women as personal captives. Rape became a daily ritual before the inevitable execution. The cruelty was systematic. Prisoners were forced to dig deep pits in the frozen earth. Dirlewanger shot them into the holes himself. Then he ordered the next group to cover the bodies before digging their own graves. There was no escape. Events accelerated in the spring of 1943. During Operation Cottbus in May and June, the unit swept through the countryside. Dirlewanger reported a massive victory, over 14,000 enemies eliminated. But the archives revealed the truth. Most of the dead were unarmed. They were farmers, the elderly, and children. The footage shows charred timber and empty fields where houses once stood. In the open terrain, he used living bodies as tools. He marched civilians ahead of his troops through active minefields. They cleared the path with their lives. He locked entire families inside wooden barns. Then came the fire. He stood outside and listened to the screams until the roofs collapsed. Berlin was not blind to these crimes. Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler knew every detail. He read the reports. He saw the complaints from regular army officers who were horrified by the sadism. But there was no punishment. There was a reward. On December 5, 1943, Himmler personally presented Dirlewanger with the German Cross in gold. It was one of the highest military honors available. At first glance, a rogue commander, but in reality, a favored executioner. In radio transmissions, Himmler used the affectionate nickname, "My dear Jochen." The signal to the rest of the SS was clear. These methods had official sanction from the very top. This immunity extended to the treatment of his own men. Dirlewanger ruled his unit with a whip. He beat soldiers who showed hesitation. He executed his own troops for minor infractions. Law did not exist here. Only his will remained. Every Thursday meant death. That was the schedule. One witness described the routine. Oskar Dirlewanger hanged people once a week without fail. Sometimes they were resistance fighters. Often, they were just his own soldiers who had annoyed him. A dirty uniform or a wrong look was enough. The entire unit lived in terror of their own commander. But this was only a warm-up. August 1944. The Warsaw Uprising began. Polish resistance forces launched a desperate armed rebellion against the German occupation. They raced to liberate the city before Soviet forces arrived. Hitler was enraged. He did not ask for a counterattack. He demanded erasure. He issued an order preserved in the archives. Every resident must be killed. No prisoners to be taken. Warsaw must be leveled to the ground. Himmler picked up the phone. He called the SS and police leadership in Warsaw. His instructions were specific: destroy tens of thousands. The man chosen to execute this genocide was Oskar Dirlewanger. His brigade had expanded to regimental size, 1,900 men. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were convicts recruited from SS penal camps, murderers, rapists, and thieves. On August 5, 1944, Dirlewanger's forces entered the Wola district on the city's western edge. What followed was not war. It was the Wola Massacre. German forces, led by Dirlewanger and the notorious Kamiński Brigade, moved house to house. The order was absolute: men, women, children, infants, the elderly, the sick. Nobody was spared. The accounts are physically difficult to read. Witnesses describe drunken soldiers using bayonets to perform crude cesarean sections on pregnant women. They did not stop there. They cut off fingers to steal rings. They used pliers to yank gold teeth from living mouths. Women were raped in front of their families. Then, the families were killed. The violence escalated. Soldiers lined up hundreds of civilians against brick walls. Machine guns cut them down. They herded families into basements. Then, they pulled the pins on grenades and threw them down the stairs. Entire apartment buildings were set on fire. The doors were locked from the outside. The sound of screaming was audible for blocks. At the Ursus factory on Volska Street, the slaughter was industrial. Nearly 6,000 civilians were murdered in a single day. The railway embankment on Gorchevska Street became an execution site. Thousands died on the tracks. The Franaszek factory, the Pfeiffer factory, dozens of locations turned into killing grounds. One particularly horrific account survives. Soldiers entered a residential building. A soldier grabbed a young woman. He raped her on a table while gripping a bayonet in his other hand. Then he cut her open from belly to neck. She was still alive. The camera of history records a nightmare at the Wolski Hospital. Dirlewanger's men murdered the wounded patients in their beds. They gang-raped the nurses. Then they hanged them by their feet and shot them in the stomachs. At first glance, a scene of total anarchy. But in reality, it was a twisted kingdom for one man. In a rare instance of mercy that reveals his psychology, Dirlewanger spared the hospital building itself. He made it his personal headquarters. As long as he lived there, the murders in that specific location decreased. He ordered fine carpets and silver looted from Warsaw homes brought to his room. He lived in luxury, surrounded by the stench of death. Estimates of the death toll vary: 40,000 to 60,000 civilians killed. Just 1 week. The bodies were so numerous they blocked the streets. Witnesses described stacks of corpses 3 and 4 deep. The smell of rotting flesh filled the entire district. Specialized units arrived with flamethrowers. They burned the corpses to hide the evidence. Even Erich von dem Bach-Zelewski, the overall German commander, was disturbed by the brutality. But he couldn't stop it. Dirlewanger operated under direct orders from the top. He had carte blanche. Why did this strategy fail? The Germans expected the terror would break the Polish spirit, but fear turned into rage. Polish fighters and civilians realized the truth. Surrender meant death anyway. There was no incentive to stop. They decided to fight to the last. The uprising continued for 2 more months. It was only crushed in October 1944. September 30th, 1944. On this day, the highest military honor of the Third Reich was pinned to a murderer's chest. Adolf Hitler personally awarded the Knight's Cross to Oskar Dirlewanger. The medal was intended for heroes, but the recipient was a sadist who had burned children alive and raped women to death in the ruins of Warsaw. The dictator shook the butcher's hand. It was a signal to all traitors. Cruelty was now the only currency that mattered to the regime. In October, the unit moved to Slovakia to crush another uprising. The script remained the same. Villages burned, civilians died. But by early 1945, the situation changed. The Red Army was no longer a distant threat. It was on the doorstep. The Dirlewanger Brigade was thrown into the line of fire against regular Soviet troops. Why did the High Command trust them? They believed in the brigade's ferocity. But fear of the Americans and Soviets was stronger than any oath. At first glance, they were an elite SS force, but in reality, they were a rabble of criminals incapable of modern warfare. They could slaughter the defenseless. But against tanks and artillery, they panicked. The unit disintegrated under fire. Casualties were massive. In March, a Soviet bullet found Dirlewanger. He was wounded in the chest and evacuated to the rear. The footage from this period shows chaos. Roads are clogged with refugees. Smoke rises from every horizon. Events accelerated. Dirlewanger recovered, but his world was collapsing. By late April, Berlin was encircled. April 30th, Hitler committed suicide. May 8th, Germany surrendered. The war was over. While the remnants of his brigade were captured by the Soviets and sent to face the Gulag, Dirlewanger chose a different path. He ran. He stripped off his uniform. He put on civilian clothes. He adopted a false name. The commander fled south, escaping into the French occupation zone. He found a remote hunting lodge near the town of Altshausen in Upper Swabia. He locked the door and waited. But hiding was impossible. June 1st, 1945. French authorities arrested a suspicious man. He claimed to be a refugee, but witnesses were brought in. A former concentration camp inmate stared at the prisoner. The recognition was instant. The man in the lodge was SS Oberfuhrer Oskar Dirlewanger. There was no escape. The police report records his transfer. He was taken to the detention center in Altshausen. The guards threw him into a cell with a Luftwaffe lieutenant named Anton Fussinger. The door slammed shut. What happened behind those walls remains a subject of debate. 6 days later, the cell fell silent. On June 7th, the guards removed a body. The official French death certificate stated the cause clearly: heart failure, no mention of bruises or broken bones. Thus ended the life of the Warsaw executioner. June 4th, 1945. That was the date the official lie began to unravel. Decades later, the truth emerged from a combination of witness testimony, German investigations, and dusty archival documents opened in the 1990s. It was not a peaceful end. Why did the official story crumble? It seemed airtight for years, but the testimony of a cellmate named Anton Fusinger destroyed the fabrication. On the night of June 4th to 5th, the routine changed. Guards approached the cell. They didn't bring food. They took Oskar Dirlewanger for interrogation. They dragged him into the corridor. Fusinger remained behind, listening to the audio of the aftermath: fists striking flesh, wooden clubs hitting bone, the low groaning of a man in agony. When the guards threw him back into the cell, the damage was visible. His face was a swollen mask of blood. His breathing was shallow and ragged. His ribs were broken, but this was only the beginning. The next night, June 5th to 6th, the boots returned. This time, the violence escalated. Dirlewanger was hauled out again. Multiple guards took turns. The brutality was systematic. At first glance, a standard military interrogation, but in reality, a slow, calculated execution. They were not asking questions. They were not looking for maps or names. They were inflicting damage. When he returned to the cell this time, he was barely conscious. Fusinger described a broken man. Fractures were visible. Internal injuries were almost certain. But who were the executioners? German and Polish investigators spent decades hunting for the answer. The most consistent evidence points to a specific group: Polish guards serving in a French uniform, likely the 29th Polish Infantry Group. The camera of history is blurry here, but the context is sharp. Some records suggest these men were former forced laborers, liberated from German camps and handed a rifle. Others claim they were former concentration camp prisoners who recognized the face of the butcher. One theory is even darker. These were Polish soldiers who survived the Warsaw Uprising. They knew exactly what Dirlewanger had done to their capital. They remembered the slaughter. Now, they had him alone in a room. Events accelerated. The final beating took place on the night of June 6th to 7th. There was no restraint left. The guards used clubs until his skull fractured. They kicked his ribs until the bones snapped. They stomped on his torso until his spleen ruptured. Massive internal hemorrhage followed. Later, medical evidence from the exhumation confirmed every blow. On the morning of June 7, 1945, the cell was silent. Guards found Oskar Dirlewanger dead on the floor. The French authorities moved quickly to cover their tracks. They issued a death certificate immediately. The official cause, natural heart failure. The age, 49. There was no mistake. It was a cover-up. The French command wanted to avoid a scandal involving their guards. But nobody believed the document. A healthy man does not suddenly die of heart failure in a high-security prison. German officials saw the body. They saw the bruises. They suspected murder instantly. The French buried him in a hurry, an unmarked grave. No ceremony, no stone, just a corpse in the ground. But the story refused to die. Rumors spread like wildfire. People whispered that Dirlewanger had survived. He had escaped. Tabloid newspapers printed wild headlines. Sightings were reported across the globe. One popular story claimed he joined the French Foreign Legion and was fighting in the jungles of Vietnam. Another claimed he fled to Egypt to serve as a bodyguard for President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Some conspiracy theorists insisted he converted to Islam and lived under a false identity. These rumors persisted for 15 years. By 1960, the pressure became too much. The mayor of Altshausen demanded the truth. He requested an exhumation to prove Dirlewanger was dead and silence the press. Investigators opened the earth in 1960. They found the remains. They confirmed the identity. The forensic report reads like an indictment: brutal torture, fractured skull, smashed ribs, ruptured spleen, cause of death, beating. The exhumation proved the French death certificate was a lie. But by then, the world had moved on. The Polish guards were never identified by name. No charges were filed. The French occupation authorities had long since returned home. The case was closed. Oskar Dirlewanger was reburied in an unmarked grave. Thus ended an era. June 7, 1945. On that day, the most dangerous man in the SS stopped breathing. Was it justice or was it murder? The legal answer is simple. It was a crime. Oskar Dirlewanger was a prisoner of war in French custody. He was awaiting trial. The Geneva Conventions protected him. The international laws of war shielded him, but the men guarding his cell did not care about paper laws. The guards were Polish. They beat him. They didn't use weapons. They used boots and fists. The autopsy report listed the damage: a fractured skull, broken ribs, massive internal trauma. Legally, this was an extrajudicial execution, a lynching. But look at the dossier. Dirlewanger was not a normal soldier. He was a butcher. Under his command, the unit slaughtered 120,000 civilians. He didn't just kill them. He burned families alive in their barns. He raped children in front of their parents. He injected young women with strychnine to watch their convulsions. The cruelty was absolute. Even the SS headquarters in Berlin received complaints. Other Nazis, men who ran concentration camps, called his methods excessive. When the SS calls you a monster, you are something worse than human. If anyone on earth deserved a painful end, it was Oskar Dirlewanger. Why did the guards snap? Context matters. These were Polish soldiers. They had likely survived the occupation. Perhaps they had family in Warsaw. Perhaps they saw the smoke rising from the capital during the uprising. They looked through the bars of the cell and saw the architect of that destruction. They didn't see a prisoner. They saw the devil. And they decided he didn't deserve a judge. At first glance, a sophisticated intellectual. But in reality, a sadist. This is the most disturbing part of the file. Dirlewanger wasn't insane. He wasn't a raving lunatic screaming at walls. He was a doctor of political science. He was educated. He understood tactics, logistics, and strategy. He held an iron cross. He had options. He could have been a respectable officer. But he chose the darkness. Every murder was a calculation. Every act of torture was deliberate. He became what historians call the most extreme executioner of the Third Reich. Not because he was forced, but because he enjoyed it. The archives describe the scene of his death. The cell is small. The floor is concrete. Dirlewanger lies in the corner, unable to stand. He is 50 years old. He has survived 2 world wars. He has survived bullet wounds and shrapnel. But he cannot survive the vengeance of the Polish guards. A frightened cellmate watches from the shadows, paralyzed by the sound of bone-striking stone. There was no escape this time. In the past, political connections saved him. Himmler protected him. But in a French prison, Himmler was gone. Was the beating justified? If you believe in the rule of law, the answer is no. Dirlewanger deserved a trial. He deserved to sit in the dock at Nuremberg. He deserved to hear the prosecutors read the list of his victims. He deserved to face the eyes of the survivors. He never got that. Instead, he got 3 nights of agony. There is a brutal symmetry to it. He had beaten countless people to death. He had laughed at their pain. Now, he felt every blow. He died alone, in terror, on a cold floor. He received exactly what he had delivered to thousands of others. But this creates a problem. If we celebrate this murder, we undermine the law. If killing prisoners is acceptable because their crimes are heinous, the system collapses. We become the thing we fight against. Yet, it is hard to condemn those guards. They saw the man who turned Warsaw into a graveyard. They saw the man who murdered 60,000 civilians in a single week. They saw a child rapist and a mass murderer. And they finished him. Was it justice? Was it revenge? Perhaps it was both. History offers no comfort here. We know the facts. Oskar Dirlewanger was one of the worst human beings to walk the earth. His unit, the Black Hunters, committed crimes that defy language: mass rape, torture for sport, necrophilia. He did it eagerly. He did it joyfully. And then it ended. The survivors in Belarus never saw him in handcuffs. The mothers in Warsaw never heard a verdict. But they got confirmation. The monster was dead. Justice arrived not with a gavel, but with a beating. 10 years later, in 1975, West German prosecutors tried to open a case. They wanted to investigate the crimes of the Dirlewanger Brigade. It was too late. The witnesses were dead. The perpetrators had vanished into the post-war chaos. The investigation hit a wall. If he had lived, he would have hanged. Instead, his body was dumped into an unmarked grave in Altshausen. No monument, no name, just dirt covering a fractured skull. This story serves as a warning. Evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it has a doctorate. Sometimes it wears a clean uniform. Sometimes it is intelligent, polite, and educated. And sometimes justice does not come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from angry men in a dark corridor. Whether that makes us better or worse, history will have to decide. Thus ended the era of the Black Hunter.